My name is Alan Price, and I'm honored to serve as director here at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum. Together with my colleague Stephen Rothstein, who's director of the Kennedy Library Foundation, and both of our teams, we welcome you to the PEN Hemingway Award ceremony. I would like to acknowledge all those who make this event possible, including the many sponsors listed in your program, whose representatives and leaders are present with us today, and who also join in welcoming all of you, both here and online, for today's celebration of writers, writing, and the power of a writer's voice. PEN America and the Hemingway Foundation partner with the Hemingway Family Award to make this extraordinary award possible. We are thrilled to have members of the Hemingway family joining us here in Boston and watching online. Our greetings go out over the live stream to Ernest Hemingway's son Patrick and his wife Carol, who are watching from their home in Montana. Patrick and Carol are the vanguard of support for the PEN Hemingway Awards and for the Ernest Hemingway collection that resides here in the John F. Kennedy Library. We are honored to be the world's largest repository for the writer's personal papers, photographs, and mementos. Patrick's annual readings from his father's works at the PEN Hemingway ceremony had for decades been an important moment for us here at the library, and now stepping into his uncle's role this year is the writer's grandson, Dr. Seán Hemingway. He and his wife, Dr. Colette Hemingway, co-chair the Hemingway Council, which raises funds for and awareness of the collection. And we are delighted to welcome Seán and Colette's daughter, Anouk Hemingway, the writer's great-granddaughter. One of the reasons I was drawn to the Kennedy Library and excited by the opportunity to lead this great institution is the fact that we preserve and provide access to the Ernest Hemingway collection. With over 90% of his manuscripts and papers, and over 10,000 photographs and artifacts, we hold this jewel of a collection in the public trust. As Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis expressed it so well in a letter to Mary Hemingway, quote, "I would be so proud to have Jack's papers in Ernest Hemingway's library." Ernest Hemingway's writings captured my attention and imagination and inspired me throughout my formative years. I particularly enjoyed those moments when I felt like I was eavesdropping on dangerous situations and important conversations. I encountered a romanticism and heroism that ennobled me to dream bigger. There was tragedy that made me a more compassionate person. President Kennedy admired courage, particularly courage in the public sector, as an all too rare virtue worthy of our study, admiration, and recognition. How do we best develop courage in people? Reading Ernest Hemingway couldn't hurt. Ernest Hemingway contributed greatly to my development as a human being. In keeping with the ideals of the liberal arts, Hemingway harnessed the power of language to develop in me the powers of observation, appreciation, and healthy skepticism. This informal education on life also carried a secret lesson: how to write. Hemingway shaped my conscious and intuitive appreciation of great writing and the beauty of the English language that emerges when one strips away ornamentation and allows the reader's imagination to fill in the details of a story. Now that I'm here at the Kennedy Library and have the occasional privilege of holding in my hands some of his handwriting and typing and drafting and redrafting and editing and corresponding and cutting and the craftsmanship and hard work that go into the creation of a sentence that tries to say something true. My life has come full circle to better understand my own life as a creation of Hemingway's genius. I would like to now share and contrast two fragments of writing. One comes from Ernest Hemingway. It is the first sentence of a short story titled "The Capital of the World." You may know it. Madrid is full of boys named Paco, which is the diminutive of the name Francisco, and there is a Madrid joke about a father who came to Madrid and inserted an advertisement in the personal columns of El Liberal, which said, "Paco, meet me at Hotel Montana, noon, Tuesday. All is forgiven, Papa," and how a squadron of Guardia Civil had to be called out to disperse the 800 men who answered the advertisement. I do love that sentence. Within it is a whole story, a whole world. It was published in 1936. I first read the story in 1979, which happened to be the year that this Kennedy Library was dedicated. And some of you, I have reminded today, were here for that dedication. Welcome back. This past January, in an attempt to create something positive during the time of a government shutdown, I put pen to paper in my own humble attempt to write a true sentence. The following sentence emerged. Having planned and attained the perfect weight at the anticipated Saturday, Hector ate a carefully measured pound of cheese-smothered nachos and announced from his back porch to family and neighbors that his body was now precisely 1% nacho before blowing out the candles and making his only birthday wish that would actually come true. As I see it, our challenge now, faced by so many writers who look to Papa's writings like a beacon, is to do the work necessary to prove ourselves more than lesser copies of the original. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Seán Hemingway. Dr. Hemingway is the John A. and Carol O. Moran Curator in Charge of New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art. He is a renowned archaeologist with a specialty in Greek and Roman bronzes and has excavated prehistoric, classical, and Roman sites in Greece and Spain. He received his doctorate from Bryn Mawr College, studied as a Fulbright Scholar at the American School of Classical Studies in Athens, and has been a visiting curator at the American Academy in Rome. He is the author of numerous scholarly publications, including The Horse and Jockey from Artemisian, a bronze equestrian moment of the Hellenistic period, and of the novel The Tomb of Alexander. He is also editor of the Hemingway Library editions of Ernest Hemingway's works. Please join me in welcoming to our stage Dr. Seán Hemingway.
Thank you, Alan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a privilege for me to be here with you this afternoon and represent the Hemingway family. For many years, as Alan said, my Uncle Patrick, Ernest Hemingway's second son, would read something from his father's work at this event, and I would like to continue that tradition. Patrick and Carol Hemingway are watching the live stream of this today in their home in Montana, and so I send them warm greetings and a big thank you for all that they have done to support great literature and the Hemingway collection here at the John F. Kennedy Library. The passage I'm going to read to you is an unpublished account of the Spanish Civil War from my grandfather's paper here at the Kennedy. It was written by Ernest Hemingway in the summer of 1936 and will be included in the forthcoming Hemingway Library edition of his novel, For Whom the Bell Tolls, which will be published in July. Here it is. During the last 15 months, I saw murder done in Spain by the fascist invaders. Murder is different from war. Men can hate war and be opposed to it, yet become accustomed to it as a way of life when it is fought to defend your country against an invader and for your right to live and work as a free man. In such a case, no man who is a man gives any importance to his life because so much more important things are at stake. A man observing this same war and writing of it cares nothing for his life either if he believes in the necessity of what he is doing. He cares only to write the truth. So when the German Messerschmitt plane dives on your car with all 4 machine guns chattering, you swerve to the side of the road and jump out of the car. You lie flat under a tree if there's a tree, or in a ditch if there's a ditch, or sometimes you lie in the open field. And when the plane comes back to try to kill you again, and his bullets throw dust spouts over your back, you lie with your mouth dry. But you laugh at the plane because you're alive. You have no hatred. It is war. He thinks your car is a staff car, and he has a right to kill you. He does not kill you, so you laugh. The Messerschmitt is too fast for good ground strafing. When he pulls up from the dive, he drops some little bombs like hand grenades tied in bunches out of a chute. They make a big flash and a roar, and there is a roll of gray smoke. You are still alive, and the Messerschmitt is gone, his motor in a whine like a circular saw hitting a log in a lumber mill. You try to spit because you know from experiment that you cannot spit if you are really scared. You find your mouth is too dry to spit, and you laugh again, and that is all. There is no bitterness when the fascists try to kill you, because they have a right to, even by mistake. But you have anger and hatred when you see them do murder, and you see them do it almost every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Seán. I don't think it's fair for me to follow these beautiful words. Good afternoon. My name is Clarice Sharif, and I'm the Director of Public Programs and Literary Awards at PEN America. I bring greetings from our CEO, Suzanne Nossel, and PEN America President Jennifer Egan, who wished they could be here today with us. I also would like to start by congratulating our winner, Tommy Orange, for his extraordinary achievement, and he's the reason why we gather today on this beautiful afternoon. I'm honored to be here to celebrate the PEN Hemingway Award, an annual award built on the vision and commitment of the Hemingway family, the Hemingway Foundation, the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, the UCross Foundation, and the dedicated group of writers, volunteers, and leaders who for many years brought to life the PEN community in Boston and New England. And on that note, I'd like to say a special thank you to Helen Atwan, who is here today, for many years of leadership for this special award. I would like also to thank our finalists who are here today with us. Thank you, Viet Thanh Nguyen, for agreeing to be our keynote speaker, and thank you to you, our audience, for joining us. For those who may not know PEN America, I'll say a few words. We stand at the intersection of literature and human rights to protect free expression here and abroad. Founded in 1922, PEN America's work is built on the fundamental principles and beliefs articulated in the PEN International Charter, which reminds us that literature knows no frontiers. Members of PEN pledge themselves to do their utmost to dispel race, class, and national hatreds, and to champion the ideal of one humanity living in peace in the world. And I always go back to this charter time and time again to remember in my daily work why we do the work that we do. Our strength is our membership, though, a nationwide community of more than 7,000 novelists, journalists, nonfiction writers, editors, poets, essayists, playwrights, publishers, translators, agents, and other writing professionals, as well as devoted readers and supporters who join with these writers to carry out PEN America's mission. please consider to join us in this beautiful fight and struggle. You can join us as a member, but also as a supporter. And if you are in New York in a few weeks, we will hold our annual World Voices Festival from May 16th through May 12th. I encourage you to look at the schedule online, and if you're up for a day trip or more, please join us in New York for a wonderful celebration of literature, international literature also. Today, we're also celebrating a long tradition and a long-standing program. Since 1963, the PEN America Literary Awards have honored many of the most outstanding voices of literature across diverse genres, including fiction, poetry, science writing, essays, biography, etc. With the help of our partners, PEN America confers over 20 distinct awards, fellowships, and grants in prizes every year, awarding nearly $370,000 to writers and translators. And this is a special way to close out our 2019 PEN America Literary Awards cycle, honoring today our PEN Hemingway winner. So today, my role is to introduce and present the awards to the winner and the finalists. The PEN Hemingway Award honors a debut novel of exceptional merit by an American author, and we are glad to have a chance to recognize some of the most exciting new additions to the American literary canon with this award. Before we begin our presentation, though, this would not happen without the work of our judges. I want to extend our deepest thanks to our award judges, Christina Garcia, Dina Mengistu, and Scott Simon, who generously dedicated their time and energy to the task of reading the incredible, diverse, and exciting debut novels that were published in 2018. And this year, we had an incredible selection of work from different backgrounds, different places in the US, but all vital stories. I'm going to announce the honorable mentions first. So Megan Kenny, for her novel, The Driest Season, a coming-of-age story set during World War II. Congratulations, Megan. Please help me with a round of applause. Our second honorable mention is unfortunately unable to be with us this afternoon because he's currently incarcerated. But please join me in congratulating Nico Walker for his debut novel, Cherry, which has been described as the first great novel of the opioid epidemic. Tim O'Connell, his editor, is here in his stead. Congratulations, Nico, and thank you, Tim, for being here. And now, to our finalists. Our first finalist, Akweke Emezi, is the author of a novel, Fresh Water. Our judges said, Akweke Emezi's Fresh Water is an inventive and impressive debut novel, mixing genres and traditions to explode and explore identity and trauma. A coming-of-age story, Fresh Water follows Ada from Nigeria to an American college campus, drawing on Igbo cosmology and contemporary culture to explore the plural individual. Akweke is unable to be here this afternoon, but to read from their novel, Lily Philpott from PEN America will come to the stage now.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I hope to do Akweke justice. This is from the beginning of Fresh Water. So there she was, a fat baby with thick, wet black hair. And there we were, infants in this world, blind and hungry, partly clinging to her flesh, and the rest of us trailing behind in streams through the open gates. We've always wanted to think that it was a careless thing the gods did, rather than a deliberate neglect. But what we think barely matters, even being who we are to them, their child. They are unknowable. Anyone with sense realizes that, and they are about as gentle with their own children as they are with yours. Perhaps even less so, because your children are just weak bags of flesh with a timed soul. We, on the other hand, their children, the hatchlings, godlings, Okbanje, can endure so much more horror. Not that this mattered. It was clear that she, the baby, was going to go mad. We stayed asleep, but with our eyes open, still latched onto her body and her voice as she grew in those first slow years when nothing and everything happens. She was moody, bright, a heaving sun, violent. She screamed a lot. She was chubby and beautiful and insane if anyone had known enough to see it. They said she followed her father's side, the grandmother who was dead, for her dark skin and her thick hair. Saul did not name her after his mother, though, as perhaps another man would have. People were known to return in renovated bodies. It happens all the time. But when he looked into the wet blackness of her eyes, he, surprisingly for a blind man, a modern man, did not make that mistake. Somehow, Saul knew that whatever looked back out of his child was not his mother, but someone, something else. Everyone pressed into the air around her, pinching her cheeks and the fatty tissue layered underneath, pulled in by what they thought was her when it was really us. Even asleep, there are things we cannot help, like pulling humans to us. Sachi watched the visitors flock around the baby, concern sprouting in her like a green shoot. This was all new. Chima had been so quiet, so peaceful, cool to Sachi's heat. Disturbed, she looked for a patu and found one, a dark circle of velvet black, a portable third eye, and she affixed it to the baby's forehead on that smooth expanse of brand new skin. A sun to repel the evil eye and thwart the intentions of wicked people who could coo at a child and then curse it under their breath. She was always a practical woman, Sachi. The odds were good that the child would live. At least the gods had chosen responsible humans, humans who loved her fiercely, since those first few years are when you are most likely to lose them. Still, it does not make up for what happened with the gates. The human father, Saul, had missed the birth. We never paid him much attention when we were free. He was not interesting to us. He held no vessels or universes in his body. He was off buying crates of soft drinks for the guests, while his wife fought for us for different liberations. Saul was always the type of man invested in status and image and social capital, human things. But he allowed her name, and it was later, when we were awake, that we knew that and understood at last why he'd been chosen. Many things start with a name. After the boy Chima was born, Saul had asked for a daughter, so once our body arrived, he gave it a second name that meant God answered. He meant gods answered. He meant that he called us and we answered. He didn't know what he meant. Humans often pray and forget what their mouths can do, forget that every ear is listening, that when you direct your longing to the gods, they can take that personally. Thank you.
Our second finalist is Ling Ma, author of a novel, Severance. Our judges said, Ling Ma's Severance is a dark and hilarious satire drawing on the Occupy Wall Street movement, the millennial workplace, and our current obsession with plagues and zombies. Candice Chen, the 20-year-old daughter of recently deceased Chinese immigrants, survives a fever epidemic, outlasting most of her fellow New Yorkers with deadpan humor, but Severance is more than your average dystopian novel. Please join me in welcoming Ling Ma to read from her work.
Well, great. So I'd like to thank PEN America and the JFK Library for administering the PEN Hemingway Award for debut novel, and just for recognizing writers who are just starting out in their careers. So much of writing or any creative process, it's a process of uncertainty, and I think for new writers to be given some acknowledgement, that's really helpful. I just like to read very briefly from the beginning of this novel. I wanted to read from the beginning just because this is when my process was the most uncertain and I really had no idea what I was doing. So enjoy. Can you guys hear me? Well, okay. After the end came the beginning, and in the beginning, there were 8 of us, then 9, that was me, a number which would only decrease. We found one another after fleeing New York for the safer pastures of the countryside. We'd seen it done in the movies, though no one could say which one exactly, which movie. A lot of things didn't play out as they'd been depicted on screen. We were brand strategists and property lawyers and human resource specialists and personal finance consultants. We didn't know how to do anything, so we Googled everything. We Googled how to survive in wild, which yielded images of poison ivy, venomous insects, and bear tracks. That was okay, but we wanted to know how to go on the offensive against everything. We Googled how to build fire and watched YouTube videos of fires being lit with flint against steel, with flint against flint, with magnifying glass and sun. We couldn't find the requisite flint, didn't know how to identify it even. And before we tried using Bob's bifocals, someone found a Bic in a jean jacket. The fire brought us through the night and delivered us into a morning that took us to a deserted Walmart. We stockpiled bottled water and exfoliating body wash and iPods and beers and tinted moisturizer in our stolen Jeeps. In the back of the store, we found guns and ammo, camo outfits, scopes, and grips. We Googled how to shoot gun. And when we tried, we were spooked by the recoil, by the salty smell and smoke, by the liturgical drama of the whole thing in the woods. But actually, we love to shoot them, the guns. We like to shoot them wrong even, with a loose hand, the pitch forward and the pitch back. Under our judicious trigger fingers, beer bottles died, Vogue magazines died, chia pets died, oak saplings died, squirrels died, elk died. We feasted. Google would not last long, neither would the internet or any of the infrastructure. But in the beginning of the beginning, let us brag, if only to ourselves in the absence of others, because who was there to envy us, to be proud of us? Our Googlings darkened, turned inward. We Googled Maslow's pyramid to see how many of the need levels we could already fulfill. The first 2. We Googled 2011 fever survivors, hoping to find others like us, and when all we found were the same outdated, inconclusive news articles, we Googled 7 stages grief to track our emotional progress. We were at anger, the slower among us lagging behind at denial. We Googled, is there a God? Clicked, I'm feeling lucky, and were directed to a suicide hotline site. In the 12 rings it took for us to hang up, we held our breaths for someone else, some stranger's voice confirming that we weren't the only ones living, despite Bob's adamant assertions. There was no answer. From this and other observations, it was deduced that we were alone, truly alone. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll just add quickly that what makes this ceremony very special is that we're able to actually center the writing, and as you can tell, we've heard already such beautiful and powerful words. So now on to the program with our winner, Tommy Orange. His brilliant novel, Ver Ver, was recognized by our judges in their citation in the following way. Tommy Orange's Verveer is devastatingly beautiful novel, as acutely attuned to our current cultural and political condition as it is to the indelible legacy of violence that brought us here. This novel is not only breathtaking, but also profoundly moving as Orange assembles a chorus of characters whose collective narrative disrupts and expands our literary landscape. The breadth and scope of this novel are matched only by the fierce and relentless intelligence that Orange brings to his characters, who despite tragedy, heartbreak, and loss, reside in a remarkable world of hard-earned grace. Please join me in congratulating and welcoming Tommy Orange to the stage.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for coming today. I apologize for my lack of professionalism. I'm going to read from my phone. Sincerely, I'm sorry. I first read Hemingway 10 years ago. At the time, I was living in Southern Oregon, commuting 20 miles on my bike every day between Phoenix and Ashland, where I worked for a New Age company. The guy hired me because I'm Native, and he was having dreams telling him to bring back the ghost dance. Not needless to say, the guy was white, a retired record label executive who hired me to ship things like meditation CDs and spiritual stones and scented, colored aura sprays. I was reading Hemingway because of the way I'd heard writers who wrote about how to write revere his writing. I read all of his short stories that summer. I was then writing objectively unreadable short stories the length of then limited tweets. I had quit my job to write and read as much as possible in isolation in Southern Oregon, staying with a woman who'd advertised a room for cheap in an artist's commune. When I got to her door, I found a 6-foot-tall wooden engraving of the name Jesus on fire and exactly 0 other artists living there. I kept to myself that summer, read Hemingway, shipped New Age novels with talking dogs in them all over the country. By then, I knew all I wanted to do was write. And I was just starting to understand the work you need to put in to just have a chance at writing well. Hemingway was part of that. I never even dreamed of anything close to this. I'd like to thank the Hemingway Foundation for acknowledging me in this way, for all the work that it takes to get someone like me here, for creating this award and acknowledging a new writer. Thank you to Viet for his presence here today, for his work and for the person he is in the publishing world, the way he carries himself and asks us to be better writers and humans. I'd like to thank everyone at Pan America for the work they're doing in our world, and to everyone at Knopf, my publicist Gabrielle, and my wonderful editor Jordan, and my agent Nicole Araji. Thank you to my wife and son for putting up with me, both while writing the book and now for putting up with me being gone so much. I couldn't have done it without their love and belief, nor without the love and belief and reception I've gotten for the book since it's been out. So I'm going to read, there were originally, the version of the book that I sent to my agent had 2 references to Hemingway. One of them was cut with the death of a character that never made it. So I'm going to read from the part that made it, obviously. Are both of these functional? Sorry. Bill Davis. Bill moves through the bleachers with the slow thoroughness of one who's had a job too long. He slogs along, plods, but not without pride. He immerses himself in his job. He likes to have something to do, to feel useful, even if that work, that job, is currently in maintenance. He's picking up garbage missed by the initial post-game crew. It's a job for the old guy they can't fire because he's been there so long. He knows. But he also knows he means more than that to them. Because don't they count on him to cover their shifts? Wasn't he available any day of the week for any shift? Didn't he know the ins and outs of that Coliseum better than anyone? Hadn't he done almost every single available job over all the years he'd worked there? From security, where he started, all the way to peanut vendor, a job he'd only done once and hated. He tells himself he means more. He tells himself he can tell himself and believe it. But it's not true. There's no room here for old people like Bill anymore, anywhere. Bill makes an arc like the bill of a hat with his hand and puts it on his forehead to block the sun. He wears light blue latex gloves, holds his trash grabber in one hand and a clearish gray garbage bag in the other. He stops what he's doing. He thinks he sees something come over the top rim of the stadium, a small thing, an unnatural movement, definitely not a seagull. Bill shakes his head, spits on the ground, then steps on the spit, pivots, then squints to try to see what it is up there. His phone vibrates in his pocket. He pulls it out and sees that it's his girlfriend, Karen. No doubt it's about her man-boy son, Edwin. Lately, she's been calling all the time about him. Mostly about him needing rides to and from work. Bill can't stand the way she babies him. Can't stand the 30-odd-year-old baby he is. Can't stand what the youth are allowed to become these days. Coddled babies, all of them, with no trace of skin, no toughness left. There's something wrong about all of it. Something about the ever-present phone glow on their faces, or the too fast way they tap their phones, their gender-fluid fashion choices, their hyper-PC gentle way of being, while lacking all social graces and old-world manners and politeness. Edwin's this way, too. Tech-savvy, sure, but when it comes to the real, cold, hard, gritty world outside beyond the screen, without the screen, he's a baby. Yes, things look bad these days. Everyone talks like it's getting better, and that just makes it all the worse that it's still so bad. It's the same with his own life. Karen tells him to stay positive, but you have to achieve positivity in order to maintain it. He loves her, though, all the way. And he really tries to see it as being okay. It just seems like young people have taken over the place. Even the old people in charge, they're acting like kids. There's no more scope, no vision, no depth. We want it now, and we want it new. This world is a mean curveball thrown by an overly excited, steroid-fueled kid pitcher who no more cares about the integrity of the game than he does about the Costa Ricans who painstakingly stitch the balls together by hand. The field is set up for baseball. The grass is so short it doesn't move. It is the oak cork stillness of the center of a baseball. The grass is chalked with straight lines that separate foul and fair, that reach out to the stands and back toward the infield where the players play the game, where they pitch and swing and steal and tag, where they signal and hit and strike and ball, score runs, where they sweat and wait in the shade of the dugout, just chewing and spitting until all the innings run out. Bill's phone rings again. This time he answers. Karen, what is it? I'm working. I'm so sorry to bother you at work, honey, but Edwin needs to be picked up later. He just can't, after what happened to him on the bus. You know how I feel about Bill. Please, just do it this time. I'll have a talk with him later. I'll let him know he can't count on you anymore, Karen says. count on you anymore. Bill hates the way she can turn it on him with just a few choice words. Don't put it like that. Put it on him. He needs to be able to make it on his own now. At least he's got a job now. He's working every day. That's a lot for him, please. I don't want to discourage him. The goal is to get him out there on his own, remember? And then we can talk about you being able to move in finally, Karen says, her voice sweet now. Okay. Really? Thanks, hon. If you could pick up a box of Franzia on the way home, the pink one. We're out. You owe me tonight, Bill says, and hangs up before she can respond. Bill looks around the stadium, appreciating the stillness. He needs this kind of stillness, clean of movement. He thinks about the incident on the bus, Edwin. It could still make Bill laugh just to think of it. He smiles, a smile he can't contain. On his first day of work, Edwin got into it with a vet on the bus. Bill doesn't know how it started, but whatever happened, the bus driver ended up kicking both of them off the bus. Then the guy chased Edwin all the way down International in his wheelchair. Luckily, he chased him in the right direction, and Edwin made it to work on time despite getting kicked off the bus. Probably because he got chased. Bill laughs out loud thinking about Edwin running for his life down International, making it on time to work a sweaty mess. Well, that part wasn't funny, actually. That part made it sad. Bill walks by a metal surface on the east wall. He sees himself reflected there. He steadies his unstable, distorted reflection in the dented metal paneling, straightens his shoulders, picks up his chin. The guy in the black windbreaker there, whose hair is fully grayed and receding, and whose stomach comes out a little more each year, whose feet and knees hurt when he stands or walks too long. He's okay. He's making it. He could easily not be making it. He's almost always not been making it. This Coliseum, the team, the Oakland Athletics had once been the most important thing in the world for Bill. During that magical time for Oakland, 1972 to 1974, when the A's won 3 World Series in a row, you don't see that happen anymore. It's too much of a business now. They would never allow that. Those were strange years for Bill. Bad, awful years. He'd gotten back from Vietnam after going AWOL in 71, dishonorably discharged. He hated the country, and the country hated him. There were so many drugs coursing through him then, it was hard to believe he could still remember any of it. Most of all, he remembers the games. The games were all he had then. He had his teams, and they were winning 3 years in a row, right when he needed it. After what felt to Bill like a lifetime of losing. Those are the years of Vida Blue, Catfish Hunter, Reggie Jackson, the bastard Charlie Finley. And then when the Raiders won in 76, 2 championships that San Francisco teams hadn't won yet, it was a really good time to be from Oakland, to feel that you were from that thing, that winning. He got hired at the Coliseum in 1989 after doing 5 years at San Quentin for stabbing a guy outside a biker bar on Fruitvale down by the railroad tracks. It wasn't even Bill's knife. The stabbing was coincidental. It was self-defense. He didn't know how the knife ended up in his hand. Sometimes you just did things. You acted or reacted the way you needed to. The problem had been that Bill couldn't get his own story straight. The other guy had been less drunk, had a more consistent story. So Bill took the fall. It was his knife somehow in the end. He was the one with a history of violence, the crazy AWOL Vietnam vet. But jail had been good to Bill. He read almost the whole time he was in. He read all the Hunter S. Thompson he could get his hands on. He read Hunter's lawyer, Oscar Zeta Acosta. He loved the autobiography of a brown buffalo and the revolt of the cockroach people. He read Fitzgerald and Hemingway, Carver and Faulkner, all the drunks. He read Ken Kesey. He loved One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He was pissed when they made the movie and the native guy who was the narrator of the whole book just played the crazy silent stoic Indian who threw the sink through the window at the end. He read Richard Brautigan, Jack London. He read history books, biographies, books about the prison system, books about baseball, football, California native history. He read Stephen King and Elmore Leonard. He read and he kept his head down, let the years dissolve the way they could when you were somewhere else inside them, in a book, on the block, in a dream. Another good year that came out of bad times for Bill was 1989 when the A's swept the San Francisco Giants. when in the middle of the World Series, just before the start of Game 3, the earth slipped, dropped, quaked. The Loma Prieta earthquake killed 63 people, or 63 people died because of it. The Cypress Freeway collapsed, and someone drove right off the Bay Bridge, where a section had collapsed in the middle. That was the day baseball saved lives in Oakland and the greater Bay Area. If more people hadn't been at home, sitting around the TV watching the game, they would have been on freeways. They would have been out in the world where it was collapsing, just falling apart. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Sharon Dyeneck, president of UCross Foundation. Raymond Planck, the founder of UCross, was a force of nature. He grew up in Minnesota, the son of a farmer, graduated from Yale, became a World War II bomber pilot, founded an international oil and gas company, Apache Corporation, started other nonprofits such as the Fund for Teachers, and in 1981, he had the vision to create an artistic oasis in Ucross, Wyoming, population 25. I first met Raymond over 20 years ago at this same literary event that we are at today. He passed away last November at the age of 96 at his beloved home in Ucross, surrounded by family, and outside by wild turkeys that he had kept well fed, owls, bald eagles, and towering trees that he himself had planted 40 years earlier. UCross is a one-of-a-kind residency that gives some of the world's most gifted individuals the opportunity to work in beautiful studios on a 20,000-acre ranch on the majestic high plains of the American West. We offer the rare gift of uninterrupted time to create. The vastness of the landscape translates into a vastness of imagination. More than 2,000 writers, visual artists, and composers have spent time at UCross, and all of them would tell you that Raymond created something very special there. UCross has partnered with the Hemingway Awards since 1996, an idea that came from Annie Proulx, who was a UCross trustee at the time. She had written her first 2 novels at UCross. She'd served as a judge and suggested that we offer more support to emerging writers in whose work she saw so much potential. Since then, UCross has given residencies to 65 Hemingway honorees, including Colson Whitehead, Elizabeth Gilbert, Ha Jin, Ya Jesse, Kevin Powers, and Sigrid Nunez, who won the National Book Award just last year. When Raymond was a first grader, a teacher suggested he write a diary in order to improve his penmanship. He kept the diary his entire life. He became a book lover and read constantly, logging the names of every book he read. In his last years, he wrote a memoir that he chose to call A Small Difference, noting that all of us have the chance to leave the world a better place. Raymond had a number of things in common with Ernest Hemingway. He hunted all over the world. He loved to fish, including in Michigan. They were both legendary pipe smokers. They both loved Wyoming. One of Raymond's favorite toasts was to courage. His legacy to all of us at UCross and for writers everywhere is to continue to approach life courageously, with curiosity, enthusiasm, and intensity, to make time for the work. He set the UCross magic in motion, and supporting writers like these amazing writers that we are honoring today is what keeps the magic alive. So congratulations to all of this year's Hemingway honorees. We hope to see you in Wyoming one day soon. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Hilary Justice. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Ernest Hemingway Collection's Hemingway Scholar in Residence. a position that literally would not exist if it weren't for Patrick and Carol Hemingway. So as everyone else has, Patrick and Carol, we miss you, and we wish you were here with us today. In 1976, Ernest Hemingway's widow, Mary, established the PEN-Hemingway Award to raise awareness of and support for beginning writers working in the genre of fiction. In 1980, when the Hemingway collection was dedicated by Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis and Patrick Hemingway, it was a great day for the John F. Kennedy Library. 10 years later, at the 10th birthday celebration, if you will, of the Hemingway collection, the International Hemingway Foundation and Society held its conference here. And they brought in Mrs. Kennedy, then Mrs. Onassis, forgive me, as a guest of honor, and a very dear friend of mine and my mentor in Hemingway studies, Dr. Susan Beagle, had the honor of sitting with her at dinner when she got an idea. So if you'll allow me to share with you a once upon a time at a gala in the pavilion here at the JFK Library. The president's widow, Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy Onassis, was there in a yellow raw silk suit and her signature pearls, enjoying birthday cake. And she looked around and she said, "Wouldn't it be great if we had the PEN-Hemingway Award here at the JFK Library every year?" And Susan Beagle informs me that she said it in that first lady way of "make it so." And so it was done. The PEN-Hemingway Award has been given here at the John F. Kennedy Library and Museum every year, ever since. And until ill health prevented her from attending, Mrs. Kennedy Onassis would come and warmly congratulate the winners, and I'm sure that in spirit, she's congratulating our honorees today as well. It's my honor today to introduce our keynote speaker. Viet Thanh Nguyen is a university professor, Errol Arnold Chair of English, and professor of English, American Studies and Ethnicity and Comparative Literature at the University of Southern California, and he somehow also has time to write. He is the author of Race and Resistance, Literature and Politics in Asian America, and the novel The Sympathizer from Grove Atlantic. The Sympathizer won the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. Hemingway sends his congratulations, by the way. His work, Old Man in the Sea, was honored similarly. The Sympathizer also won the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, an Edgar Award for Best First Novel from the Mystery Writers of America, the First Novel Prize from the Center for Fiction, the Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction from the American Library Association, Le Prix du Meilleur Livre Étranger, a California Book Award, and the Asian Pacific American Award for Literature and Fiction from the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association. It was also a finalist for the PEN-Faulkner Award for Fiction and the PEN Robert W. Bingham Prize for Debut Fiction. The novel made it to over 30 Book of the Year lists, including The Guardian, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, Amazon.com, Slate.com, and The Washington Post. He's also the author of Nothing Ever Dies, Vietnam and the Memory of War, which is the critical bookend to a creative project whose fictional bookend is The Sympathizer. Nothing Ever Dies, a finalist for the National Book Award in Nonfiction and the National Book Critics Circle Award in General Nonfiction, examines how the so-called Vietnam War has been remembered by many countries and people, from the US to Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and South Korea. Kirkus Reviews calls the book a powerful reflection on how we choose to remember and forget. It has won the John G. Coelty Award for Best Textbook Primer from the Popular Cultural Association, American Cultural Association, and the Renée Welleck Prize for the Best Book in Comparative Literature from the American Comparative Literature Association. More recent books are The Refugees, a short story collection from Grove Press, and The Displaced, Refugee Writers on Refugee Lives, which he edited. He is an opinion writer for the New York Times and has written for Time, The Guardian, The Atlantic, and other venues. Along with Janet Hoskins, he co-edited Trans-Pacific Studies, Framing an Emerging Field. His articles have appeared in numerous journals and books, including PMLA, American Literary History, Western American Literature, Positions, East Asia Cultures Critique, the New Centennial Review, Postmodern Culture, and the Japanese Journal of American Studies. He has been a fellow of the American Council of Learned Societies, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Studies at Harvard, and the Fine Arts Work Center. He has also received residencies, fellowships, and grants from the Luce Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, the Asian Cultural Council, the James Irvine Foundation, and I could basically keep reading for the next hour. But instead, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Viet Thanh Nguyen.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Justice, for that incredibly long introduction. I almost fell asleep myself. Thank you to the JFK Library and to the Ernest Hemingway Collection for hosting the PEN Hemingway Awards. Good afternoon, Boston. It is so good to be back here on the occasion of congratulating Tommy Orange on his fabulous novel, There, There. For those of you who haven't read it, shame on you. It's terrific. You won't regret it. Last summer, I had the pleasure of meeting Tommy in Paris. That's actually the entire anecdote. I just wanted to say we saw each other in Paris. I think we should all have the opportunity at one point in our lives to say we saw each other in Paris. It's like something Ernest Hemingway would say. Yeah. Saw Scott, Gertrude, Alice on the Rue de Fleurs in Paris. I'm taking adult French classes right now. Just wanted to show that off. Hemingway has certainly been on my mind for a long time. I remember when I was 18, I was a college freshman. I wanted to be a writer. Told my college freshman roommate, I'm going to be a writer. And thinking of Hemingway, I told him, I'm going to publish my first novel when I'm 25. Got to 25, be another 19 years before I published my first novel. So clearly, I am no Hemingway. What I am is a refugee. And it may seem a little odd for me to say that in the present tense, because if you look at me, it's clearly the case that I've made the transition from refugee to bourgeoisie a long time ago. From camps to clubs. Very exclusive clubs, such as the JFK Presidential Library. Such an honor to be here. And when I realized this event would be hosted at the JFK Presidential Library, I remembered that I had actually quoted John F. Kennedy earlier this semester in my class on the American War in Vietnam. So on the airplane flight over, I looked up my PowerPoint slide to that quotation. John F. Kennedy was a senator at the time in 1957, and of course, Indochina, as it was called, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, were on the American radar. And speaking of Indochina, John F. Kennedy said, "This is our offspring." So as one of JFK's offspring, I would like to say, Dad, I'm home. Coming to the United States was not exactly like coming home for me. I was a refugee, as I mentioned. I was born in 1971, came here in 1975 at 4 years of age, along with 130,000 other Vietnamese refugees. And we ended up in one of 4 refugee camps that were set up to take care of us. Ours was Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. And in order to leave one of these camps, a refugee had to have a sponsor to guarantee that they wouldn't be a drain on the American state. The problem for my family of 4 was that there was not a sponsor who would take all 4 of us. So one sponsor took my parents, one sponsor took my 10-year-old brother, one sponsor took 4-year-old me. And that's where my memories begin, being taken away from my parents, howling and screaming. And I'm a father now of a 5.5-year-old son, and when he turned 4, it was the occasion for me to look back on this time in my life that I had tried to suppress. It had been so painful. And I realized that I had not forgotten it, that it had been an invisible brand stamped between my shoulder blades for decades. But also as an adult, as a parent, I could look at myself, I could look at my parents and see what they must have felt having their sons taken away from them. And we were taken away from them for a good reason, which was to help my parents find the time to get back on their feet. That's not the case in terms of what's happening at our southern border. When I think about what happened to myself and to my brother, I empathize deeply with what's happening with families that are having their children separated from them. I know that it is wrong and it is inhumane what we are doing at our southern border with the families that are coming here. Those families, the parents and their children, will be scarred for life, if my experience is any indication. And I was comparatively lucky. I was only taken away from my family for 3 months. My brother, who was 7 years older, didn't come home for 2 years. And that's why he likes to say to me, "Mom and Dad love you more." Don't feel too bad for him. 7 years after coming to this country with no English, he went to Harvard. And then just to rub it in, because I went to my last choice college, he went to Stanford Medical School, which is what you're supposed to do when you're Asian. So clearly, being a refugee is not all bad, and that was the case for me as well. I did get some good things out of being a refugee, such as the requisite emotional damage necessary to become a writer. And as a father, I've done my best to pass on that legacy to my son. 5.5 years old, like I said, like most 5.5-year-olds, he loves Legos, always asking for Legos. And if you're a parent, you know you cannot always say yes to what your children want. So sometimes I have to say, "No, you cannot get these Legos." And I ask him, "You know why you're not going to get these Legos?" And he thinks about it for a while, and he says, "Because you're a refugee?" I say, "That's right." I want him to remember that both of his parents are refugees and that all 4 of his grandparents are refugees, and it seems crucial to remind a young boy of this at this time in our history when we were undergoing the worst refugee crisis in world history since World War II. The United Nations says approximately 68 million people are displaced, 22 million of whom are officially classified as refugees. And I am certain that many of the people who are coming to our southern border are refugees, whether the United Nations calls them that or not, whether we call them that or not. Of course, the President of the United States calls these refugees animals. And as a refugee, I object to this characterization. And I object because I myself have experienced some of the sting of dehumanization, beginning with when my family moved from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania to San Jose, California in 1978, and my parents opened perhaps the second Vietnamese grocery store in San Jose, which is what you're supposed to do. When you're a refugee or an immigrant to this country, you're supposed to pursue the American dream. So it was kind of a shock when I walked down the street when I was around 10 or 11 years old and saw a sign in another window that said, "Another American driven out of business by the Vietnamese." And I thought, does this person know that my parents work 12 to 14-hour days every day in this shop? Does this person know that my parents were shot in this store on Christmas Eve? Does this person know anything about who my parents are and what they've had to go through to get to this country and to open this door? And of course, that person did not know that, did not care to know anything about my parents, saw them as less than human. And the saddest thing about this was that I internalized that sign. I remember going to high school, to the most elite high school in San Jose, California, a primarily white high school, but there were a handful of us who were of Asian descent. And we knew we were different, we just had a hard time putting it into words. So every day at lunch, we would gather in a corner of the campus, and we would call ourselves the Asian Invasion. Funny thing is, I went back to my campus a couple of years ago to give a speech, and we really have taken over. Where did we get this idea of the Asian invasion from? At least partly from movies, from American popular culture that we had absorbed. For me, it was all of the American movies about the Vietnam War that Hollywood was putting forth in the 70s and the 80s, but very particularly Apocalypse Now. I remember watching that when I was 10 or 11 years old, much too young of an age, way too precocious. And I was someone who loved American war movies. I identified with American soldiers, John Wayne and so on. And so when I was watching this movie, I was identifying with American soldiers up until the point they killed Vietnamese civilians. And then I was split in two. Was I the American doing the killing, or was I the Vietnamese being killed? Well, that experience convinced me of the power of stories. I was already in love with stories as a young refugee because I found so much comfort and solace from the refugee life in stories. But watching Apocalypse Now and movies like it also crushed me and convinced me of the power of stories to destroy us as well as save us. And I think that was the moment that I began hoping to be a writer, because I thought one day, I will take revenge on Hollywood, which is exactly what happened in The Sympathizer. But I was yearning for representation, although that was not the word I would have used. And I think I shared something in common with so many of us who have suffered from a lack of representation, from misrepresentation, from underrepresentation. We know that not having enough representation is dangerous. Not having enough representation can actually destroy lives. Not having enough representation can psychically destroy lives. So there's a great urgency to the task of representation that so many of us as writers and storytellers and artists feel. And so it's difficult for me to say that as much as representations matter, as much as we need more stories and voices and representatives, perhaps it's actually not enough. I'll give you the example of the publishing industry, which seems very relevant today. The publishing industry is 87% white. And in 1955, James Baldwin, in his book Notes of a Native Son, could write, "The world is white no longer, and it will never be white again." But a publishing industry that lionizes James Baldwin and yet is still 87% white is still quite white. So we have a lot of work to do, because in so much as we have representation and representatives and figures like James Baldwin and Toni Morrison and Ta-Nehisi Coates and so on and so forth, so many great writers, there's still nevertheless the persistence of racial and economic inequality in our civilization. And for me, what that means is not simply that there's inequality, but that there is the persistence of colonization. Now, some of you in the room are thinking, what colonization? Well, the United States is an example of successful colonization. Usually when we think of colonization, we think of France in Indochina, for example, which colonized Indochina for 80 or so years and then was defeated and kicked out. Successful colonization, however, is successful at renaming itself so that it is not called colonization. In the United States, successful colonization is called the American dream. Successful colonization is never called colonization for the same reason that successful treason is never called treason, for the same reason that successful war crimes are never called war crimes. If we look back upon our history at the founding moments of our country, which is what Tommy Orange's novel There, There does in its first 20 pages, and if you read the first 20 pages, and this is my interpretation, Tommy, you may disagree with me. I'm used to that. I'm a professor and a scholar. Writers are always saying, I don't know what you're talking about. But when I read the first 20 pages of Tommy Orange's There, There, I can't help but think that it would be very hard to deny that this country was built on the foundation of genocide. And not just genocide, but slavery, occupation, war, and racism as well. The United States is a successful colonizing country. And if we need further evidence of that, it is that whenever the United States has had the choice between choosing the sides of the colonized or the colonizer, it has almost always chosen the side of the colonizer, which is what happened in the 1940s and 1950s in Indochina. The United States had the opportunity to side with Vietnam, Laos, or Cambodia. Instead, it chose willingly to take over the war from the French. Now, I said this in my novel, The Sympathizer, and something interesting happened after that novel came out. In the first major review of the novel, in the second or third line, the reviewer said, "Viet is the voice for the voiceless." And I was like, no! Have you ever actually met any Vietnamese people? We're really, really loud. The problem is not that we don't have voices. The problem is that we're not heard. Now, this phrase, the voice for the voiceless, I'm sure you've heard it before. Maybe you've used it yourself. It's a dangerous sentiment, even though it sounds like a compliment. And the reason why it's a dangerous sentiment, because what it implies is that people would much rather hear one voice rather than a chorus or a cacophony or a community. The desire to hear the voice for the voiceless is itself a symptom of colonization. If we would rather hear a voice of the voiceless than abolish the conditions of voicelessness, then we've resigned ourselves to or agree with colonization's persistence. So representation matters. We need writers, but it's not enough. What we need is decolonization. Colonization, thank you. I must be in Boston. Colonization has resulted in a massive transfer of wealth to the colonized and their descendants. So what would we need to do? Greater taxation, redistribution, universal health care, child care, education, abolishing the prison industrial complex, demilitarization, reparations, and yes, representation. So on this list, you can clearly see that representation is the easiest task, which is why we tend to focus on it, especially in the world of literature. Now, novels themselves cannot decolonize, but novels can depict colonization, can depict the processes and the dreams of decolonization. I can think of many books that do. I'll give you a few here to show you that it's not actually impossible to have a literature of decolonization. Books that I have found striking in recent years have included Han Kang's Human Acts, which is about the Korean military dictatorship's suppression of a democratic uprising in Gwangju in 1980 in Korea. Antonio Lobos Antunes's The Land at the End of the World, which was a touchstone for me when I was writing The Sympathizer, which is about the Portuguese colonial war in Angola from the perspective of a reluctant soldier. Leila Lalamy's The Moor's Account, which is the account of the first black slave taken by Spanish conquistadors to the Americas. And of course, Tommy Orange's There as well. The problem is that in the United States, our dominant literature in contemporary American fiction, at the very least, tends to be apolitical. Decolonization is beyond the horizon of most of our contemporary American writers. That doesn't mean it should be beyond our imagination. Now, even for those of us who are committed to decolonization, who imagine ourselves working not just in the solitude of our rooms, but in the solidarity of social and political movements that transform the landscape, those of us who are doing this work, or who imagine ourselves doing this work, should not call ourselves the voices for the voiceless. We should imagine ourselves as one voice among the many social and political movements that are committed to abolishing the conditions of voicelessness that make it so easy to privilege us as writers. So looking back to my teenage self, proto-Asian invasion, I realize now that I was living in conditions of voicelessness. I was living in conditions of narrative scarcity. And what that means is that when you live in narrative scarcity, almost none of the stories are about you. So any story that comes out about you takes on tremendous weight. It's an unfair burden of representation put on these few voices or these few representatives. So when Crazy Rich Asians came out, all the Asians freaked out. We're like, oh my God, there's a movie about us. Too bad it's a bad movie, but it's okay. I'm just kidding. I actually haven't seen Crazy Rich Asians. I'm a bad Asian. I did listen to the book, though. The opposite of narrative scarcity is narrative plenitude. That's when almost all of the stories are about you. That's how you know you have privilege, when you can take it for granted that almost all of the stories are about you. Abolishing the conditions of voicelessness is about achieving narrative plenitude for everyone in our society, not just for the majority or the wealthy or the privileged. So, looking back on my teenage self, the self so desperately in need of more voices, more stories, it's clear that one of the causes for that condition was structural racism. Structural inequality. But there was one other major factor. I'm going to leave you with that as a parting public service announcement. One last factor for why there are so few stories by Vietnamese and Asian Americans out there. Do you know what it is? Asian parents. Asian parents. Asian parents out there, or you who will one day be Asian parents, or parents of Asian children, do not crush the hopes and dreams of your artistic children. Nourish them, nurture them, help them grow until one day they too can become writers, writing scathing autobiographies featuring you. Boston, thank you. You've been great.
In a moment, I hope you will be able to join us in the pavilion where we'll be able to shake hands, greet each other, and celebrate these marvelous writers. Again, as we exit, I would ask you to join me for one more round of applause for all you have done to enrich the world. Thank you for being with us this afternoon.